Welcome to Back in the Groove, where I'm getting back into vinyl after getting my collection out of storage after 25 years. Now, in this video, I'm going to be continuing on with my series of videos showing you my collection through the lens of a specific year. And in this instance, the year is 1983. As always, I'm going to go through the albums at a relatively quick pace because there's a lot to get through. So this isn't intended as a kind of review or recommendation of specific albums, more just to show you what came out during the year and what kind of year it was for good music. Now, if you like these videos, do remember to give me a thumbs up, and please do subscribe if you can, and that would really help me out. But let's get started with the first album, and the first album is from Streets. Now, Streets was the band formed by Steve Walsh after leaving Kansas. This is their first album, and what a cracker this is. I said I'm not going to do reviews, but this is an amazing album, in my opinion. It's super short. There's about 9 tracks, 30-something minutes long, but it's made by the inclusion of Mike Slammer on guitar for me. I love Steve Walsh's vocals, but Mike Slammer, who's came in from City Boy, his guitar work is phenomenal on this album. I think if Eddie Van Halen had done the guitar work, people would be raving about it. And it's really fantastic, amazing guitar work, and a great album overall. Speaking of great guitar work, and an introduction to a new guitarist on the scene for many of us was Dio's Holy Diver album, with the introduction of Vivian Campbell on guitar. Don't need to say too much about this album. I'm sure lots of us in the hard rock community are well aware of the importance of this album and how iconic it is, with great tracks like, Straight Through the Heart, Stand Up and Shout, Rainbow in the Dark, Shame on the Night, millions. There's lots of great tracks on that particular album. Now, another great album is this one, and another great guitarist in the form of John Sykes. This is Thin Lizzy's Thunder and Lightning, the only studio album, I think I'm right in saying, that features John Sykes. This particular version has a second album to it, a live album that came with it as a special edition. And this is brilliant, of course, with Cold Sweat, Thunder and Lightning, etc. But Thin Lizzy also seemed to put out another album out that year. This is Life or Live, another double album. It doesn't quite reach the heights of Live and Dangerous for me, but a great album nonetheless, with John Sykes on guitar, of course, but also including several previous guitarists in the form of Gary Moore, Eric Bell, Brian Robertson, etc., and some great performances from all of them. Now, first Canadian entry into 1983 for me is Triumph and their Never Surrender album. I think this is the one that followed Allied Forces, I think, and just keeps building on what a strong band Triumph were. I got into them in the Progressions of Power era. That album is what sort of broke Triumph for me, and probably lots of us in the UK. And this just continues on with their great brand of sort of hard rock / AOR. Next up, we've got Demon, sort of hot on the heels of the new wave of British heavy metal. This is The Plague, and some good tracks on here, including The Plague itself and Blackheath, another strong album, and I think the third album in successive years for them. I know I've included them in several of the previous videos that I've done. Now, next up is Frank Zappa, and this is The Man from Utopia, quirky album, how many times are we going to say that about Zappa and his quirky albums? But you've got the fairly poppy cocaine decisions. Then you've got some wacky things with the Dangerous Kitchen, which is kind of jazzy with lots of spoken word almost all over the guitar playing. But an album that I really enjoy personally. Next up, in a softer vein, we've got Christopher Cross. Quite mellow stuff. Christopher Cross's first album was really good. This one is Another Page. Couldn't remember the title and I couldn't see it on the written up there. A decent album from memory. Not played this in about 20 years though, if I'm honest, but I really like the debut album. Another album out in '83 that I'm not massive on is Robert Plant's The Principle of Moments. There's a couple of things on here. In the Mood was okay. I think that was the big single. Seem to remember Big Log. Maybe that was the B-side to the single. But you know, I don't think I've said this before. You know, Robert Plant certainly doesn't reach any of the heights of his Led Zeppelin work, in my opinion, as a solo artist. Now, next up, Rainbow. This is Bent Out of Shape with the Joel Turner era continuing on, and a good album. You know, really like the sort of AOR side of Rainbow with Joel Turner in the band, though totally different from Ronnie James Dio era, still decent. Next up, Bronze, which is a reasonable album, quite popular for the time, with Max Bacon on lead vocals there. Next up, one of the Alan Parsons Project albums. This is Eve, and I really like the Alan Parsons Project, and tend to pick up pretty much everything they've done, or he's done, and yeah, good album there. Then we've got Prism. This is it Beat Street? Excuse me with my without my glasses on. Yeah, this is Beat Street. Don't remember too much about this one, if I'm honest. Again, not played this in many years, as is the case obviously with much of the collection being in storage. Most of what I've listened to would have been on CD or streamed or digital files over the last 25 years or so. So many of the more obscure things in the collection probably wouldn't have been listened to. This was a fairly recent pickup. Got in a haul after getting back into vinyl. This is Wildlife. This is pre-FM with Steve and Chris Overland, which is, you know, in much of the same sort of vein that you would expect, and highly regarded. Speaking of highly regarded, this is a great album from Y&T. This one came with the free Sew patch, which I think I've still got. And this is probably my favorite of the Y&T albums. I think I saw them around this time. Main Street, Midnight in Tokyo. I really love Hang 'em High, Sentimental Fool. Lots of great tracks on there. And another great album in a similar kind of vein is this, Uriah Heep and Head First. This one has got Pete Golby on, who I think is an absolute great vocalist. Loved his work in Trapeze and loved him in Uriah Heep as well. Next up is Ozzy Osbourne. I guess we've dropped the Blizzard of Oz moniker by now, but Bark at the Moon, which, yeah, continues in the vein of Ozzy. Not the best of the albums from me, I think. Probably, you know, it's so hard to beat the debut album, wasn't it? Diary of a Madman was pretty good as well. Not so sure about Bark at the Moon. I think that was with Jake E. Lee joining the band, and the standard wasn't quite there for me. MSG, Built to Destroy. This is Gary Barden still on vocals at this point. And yeah, what can we say? Another good album. I think so far it's seeming like a good year to me. Shooting Star, this one is Burning, another album that could probably do with a listen for me after all this time. Styx, Kilroy Was Here. This was Styx's concept album. I think it was mostly led by Dennis DeYoung. Of course, you got the Mr. Roboto sound or song coming from that, very theatrical in its style. And I think Dennis DeYoung went on to do a lot of sort of Broadway stuff, didn't he? So maybe that, was an indication of his leaning at the time. Night Ranger, good album. Brad Gillis here, who we talked about Ozzy later. I think he joined Ozzy a little later, temporarily at least. Yeah, Rockin' America, Touch of Madness, Passion Play, good album. Next up, Black Sabbath with a live album. This is a Live Evil. I've talked about this in a couple of videos, and a very reasonable live album, not up there with the best of them, like UFOs, Strangers in the Night, or Lizzy's Live and Dangerous, but nonetheless a decent live album. Next up, some Todd Rundgren, the ever popular Tortured Artist, and an album of his that I really like Hideaway, Influenza, etc. So a good entry to me for Todd Rundgren. And speaking of Todd Rundgren, we've also got Utopia with Oblivion. And I think this was them moving away to a more sort of independent type label. I could be wrong. Next up, Vandenberg. Not sure where this falls in the catalogue. I think this is the second Vandenberg album. Adrian Vandenberg, of course, being the main man in there, and of course later going on to Whitesnake fame. The Tubes, Outside Inside, really good commercial album for them. I think this was probably them at the height of their commercial success. With She's a Beauty was an absolute classic off this, which did pretty well in the charts. I think even in the UK, I think it was pretty well known. And Monkey Time was a great track on here with Martha Davis from the Motels on as well. We've got The Rods in the Raw. This is a bit of a beat up copy that I think I got off a friend. This is the second album of theirs, I think, the follow up to The Rods, which I think was just the year before. We've also got Rock Goddess here, female band, three-piece. I think there's two sisters in the band, wasn't there? Yeah, Julie Turner and Jodie Turner. Saw Rock Goddess, I think, supporting Y&T at Middlesbrough Town Hall back in the day, and they were decent. Hold Me Down, I seem to recall, was a decent track. Next up, we've got Grand Prix with Samurai, Robin McCauley on vocals here, and Grand Prix were a really good band and worth checking out. Steve Hackett continuing on his solo work, his catalogue with Highly Strung, and I recall this one being a really good album. Actually, I've mentioned a couple of Steve Hackett's, and some, they're not things that I play super regularly, if I'm honest, but I recall this one being pretty good with Cell 151 and couple of others on there. I'm pretty sure. Was it Hack It to Pieces? I can't recall the others, but I remember Cell 151 being pretty good. Kiss finally became unmasked with Lick It Up, and we've got Vinnie Vincent included on the front here. Now, I'd seen Kiss on I think it must have been the Creatures of the Night tour, but I actually saw them in makeup with Vinnie Vincent at Newcastle City Hall, where he had his kind of Egyptian looking makeup on, and that was a great show. And I guess many people didn't get to see the Vinnie Vincent era makeup, but that was a great show. Next up, another Canadian hard rock band, Helix. Then we've got Genesis with this is this Genesis. I think it's this was self-titled, wasn't it? Which often sort of throws me with a band that's been around for so long. And this was okay. Mama, That's All. But, it's definitely Genesis moved into their shorter, more commercial period, changing the sound somewhat. Next up, we've got Cobra with First Strike. This is, of course, Jimmy Jameson on vocals before he joins Survivor. Then we've got some Southern rock in the form of Blackfoot with Ricky Medlock. This is Siogo, which I think was a really popular album for them. Probably, I want to say it's probably their biggest album, certainly in the UK. We've got Pat Benatar live, Live on Earth with all the usual stuff for the time on here, Heartbreaker, etc. Then we've got Black Sabbath with a one-off album with Ian Gillan on, and I think this is an album that really divides opinion. And I'm in the side that I'm not the biggest lover of Sabbath, well, at least with Gillan. Some people absolutely love this album, so it really is one that divides opinion. Next up, Blue Oyster Cult, Revolution by Night, a good, strong Blue Oyster Cult album. This era, I think, was good for them. I think this was around the time of had this just followed name of the album escapes me now, but we've just had Extraterrestrial Live, I think. Before this, we've got Revolution by Night, which was a good solid album. And then we've got Magnum with the 11th Hour. I was at a record fair yesterday in Cambridge and saw this and thought I didn't have it and very nearly bought it. I'm so glad I didn't, because I do actually still have it. Luckily, I've got everything on Discogs now, so I was able to look it up and realize that I did have it before picking up another copy. A decent album, but one of the things I loved about Magnum, when you talk about artwork and album covers, love the artwork of Rodney Matthews. I've got several books of his amazing sort of pop fantasy artist, and always loved Magnum's covers on with Rodney Matthews, and I always missed them in later years when they went in a different direction with the covers. Next up, Daryl Hall, John Oates, Rock and Soul Part 1, a really good kind of compilation with Sarah Smile, She's Gone, Private Eyes. Really enjoy that poppy poppy soft rock of Hall and Oates. Rich Girl is a great track with the that piano work in there. Really, really good stuff. Next up, What's Funk by Grand Funk. We've got Heart with Passion Works, and I think this um, is this the last album before they start to, turn into something of a hair band? It could well be. It's not a bad album. How can I refuse? Johnny Moon. There's a few decent tracks on there. Talking of hair bands, though, we've got Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, their second album of theirs. Um, was, again, Motley Crue's one of those that divide opinion. I like the first couple of albums. They maybe lose their way a little bit after that for me. And talking of losing the way a little bit, this isn't my favorite Eddie Money album either. I think his prior a couple of albums were better than that. And now for something completely different. Excuse the pun, with Monty Python. This is Monty Python's Meaning of Life, a comedy album with the Python gang, doing the latest in the movies for the time. I'm a big fan of before this, The Life of Brian was probably my favorite film and album of all times, and absolutely love that stuff. Got quite a few Monty Python records, which I do enjoy. Next up is Manowar and Into Glory Ride, which was probably the tour I saw them on. I think I'd said previously that it was probably the tour I'd seen them on, but it was probably this era again. Middlesbrough Town Hall, which was my local sort of haunt at the time. Recall seeing them on stage with all of the gear on here, coming on with the sword, sticking it in the stage. This was Gloves of Metal, Warlord, Hatred. Great stuff. Loved it, early Manowar. Band that I've got quite a few albums of and yet never really got into them. I'm not a big fan of Fish's voice, if I'm honest with you. This is Script for a Jester's Tear, and yeah, I don't know. They never really gelled with me all that well, if I'm honest. Um, Rick Wakeman, another one that didn't particularly love this album. I'm a big fan of some of Rick Wakeman's work. His major works of uh, the Wives of King Henry VIII, Six Wives of King Henry VIII, etc. Journey to the Center of the Earth, etc. But this one is sort of shorter songs that many have been written by Tim Rice, who used to work alongside Andrew Lloyd Webber on the musicals with things like Jesus Christ Superstar, etc. But I'm not a big fan of the album. Now we're getting into a bit more poppy stuff. Elton John, Too Low for Zero. I had a big period where I really loved Elton John, which was probably around this time. So really enjoyed that particular one. That was his sort of "I'm Still Standing" period that you might remember the video from. We've got some Billy Joel, "An Innocent Man." I said pop. I guess ZZ Top can't quite be put in pop, but this is the height of their commercial. The commerciality of ZZ Top. And I think I've got 3 copies of this. It just shows you what a popular album it was. Also, Elvis Costello, one of his better albums for me. Really like this particular album of his. In fact, Shipbuilding, which is on this, is one of my all-time sort of favorite songs in a way. It's a real sort of depressing kind of song, but yet there's just something eerily fantastic about it, and so sort of heartfelt, if that's the right word. But we've got Every Day I Write the Book, which is very clever. I think, and just there's just so many good songs on here. Let Them All Talk, etc. Really good, catchy album of Elvis Costello's. Now here's one I bet not many metalheads have in their collection. This is Wham, and fantastic. And I quite enjoyed Wham in their first couple of albums, like many of us. Or I probably had a bit of a poppy phase with bands like Wham, Level 42, and other stuff that was out around the time. Of course, that one had Wham Rap, etc. And in a different vein, but still really poppy, but more electronic sounding, was Thomas Dolby and the golden age of wireless. And that is that for 1983 for me. So, as usual, what did you think? Any surprises in there? What do you think of it as a year? To me, some strong albums in there. In fact, hang on, because I think I've forgotten one. I have forgotten to pull one out, which is this Journey Frontiers, I think was 1983. And I just remembered that this one was tucked in to the side. There is also another album, which was Asia's Alpha, which I haven't included because it's stuck back to back with another record, and I need to try and figure out how I can try and separate them. But this was a great album as well, of Journeys, with separate ways on. As an example, the guitar work is fantastic on this. And so, this one just shows, I think, with this, you've got Dio, Lick It Up, Wine Tea had a great album. There's just lots of great albums. Thunder and Lightning, the Streets album that I mentioned is really high on my personal list as well. So not a bad year, really, overall. The 80s continue to be a pretty strong decade for me. And without giving too much away, I think if I were to say which was the best musical decade, I'd probably be tempted to say the 80s for me. But I realize that is from a rock perspective, and that it's very much a case of the time of where you are in your life at the time tends to be your favorite sort of era. So those who are a little younger than me might prefer the 90s, for instance, if that's when they were growing up and in their sort of prime music years between 17 and 25 or something like that. But anyway, I digress. What do you think? Let me know what you thought was good about 83. Let me know what you think is bad. Tell me any albums that I've missed, and I'm sure there are many. And until next time that I do 1984, bye for now.